Hey there YouTube, Baylor here in the big cozy chair, and today I want to talk about the boss relics of Slay the Spire. So what I want to do here is rate each and every one of these different boss relics from S to D, and kind of talk about what makes each one strong, what makes each one weak when it comes to the starts. And I guess we'll talk about them in alphabetical order here, as that's how the tier maker has kind of laid them out for us. I think it makes sense to try to rate each of these kind of in general. I'll try to give each, as we go, a slightly separate rating, whether we're talking about getting it as a start, looking at it as your Act 1 boss relic, and looking at it as your Act 2 boss relic. Of course, each of these boss relics can be encountered, for the most part, in those different situations. And how good each one is does vary quite a bit. For example, I think the Cursed Key is better the later into your run you find it. So the Cursed Key is... I guess we'll rank that one first here, since I'm talking about it. I think when you start with the Cursed Key, because it's going to give you 2 or maybe even 3 curses, it's probably B or even C tier. But it becomes higher tier the later you see it. Overall, I think it's probably one of the better energy relics in Slay the Spire. It's got a downside that you can avoid by skipping chests, and there are a number of different relics that can help make this more tolerable too. For example, the Darkstone Puriat will give you 6 max HP for each curse you get. Ultimately, it's a nice energy relic with a pretty manageable downside. And I'd say that's probably B tier, or maybe if you're looking at it at the end of Act 2, I would probably say A tier. But B tier for Act 1 or for start. Astrolabe is a relic that I consider very, very good. You get to transform and upgrade 3 cards at the start of your run. That's exceptionally good. Maybe even pushing it towards S tier. But I think overall, probably, I think an A sounds like a pretty fair balance for it. You don't always get useful cards out of this. Although for the most part, any 3 upgraded cards are going to be a big improvement, and if you get a good roll of cards, the Astrolabe can be exceptional. Plus, it starts with A, how could I not? How about Blackstar? Blackstar is one of my favorite boss relics in Slay the Spire. 2 relics per elite is just fancy, fancy treasure times, all the time, everywhere. But the downside, of course, of the Black Star is that you don't get anything immediately. If you get it in place of your starter relic, then you're down the starter relic, and that makes fighting your first couple of elites a serious challenge. Or if you're picking it up at the start of Act 2, then you have to be able to defeat your Act 2 elites in order to get anything here. But if you're able to survive those first couple of combats, I think the Black Star pays off pretty well. So it's really a boss relic that pays off exceptionally well in the late game, requiring you to make some early sacrifices, which I think puts it... I give it about a B. B, not higher, because the immediate... Sometimes you just lose a run, you know, shortly after taking a Black Star. That's almost always a possibility. But if you survive, you're in good hands, and the Black Star will carry you. How about Coffee Dripper? Coffee Dripper is another energy relic. This one prevents you from resting at rest sites. A lot of the times you're able to find a relic that can counteract the Coffee Dripper, and a lot of the times I think you're able to negate it with something. Fairly conservative pathing can also mitigate the downside of the Coffee Dripper. And I think of all of the energy boss relics, the Coffee Dripper is probably the one that's most frequently free, so to speak. Most frequently something that you can benefit from without actually having to pay for the downside. Compare that to something like Busted Crown, which is a relic with an immensely serious downside. As a swap, it's definitely as low as it goes, right? This is by far the hardest of the starts. You get way fewer cards, which makes it so much more difficult to not only develop your deck immediately, but to develop it in the late game. And the later into your run that you're offered a Busted Crown, I think the better it is. After Act 1, then maybe it's like in the C tier range, and after Act 2, it can be maybe even as high as B tier. if you have a fairly well complete deck already, but Busted Crown is such a massive downside that I think it makes it really hard to to give it anything other than the lowest rating. Something of note, I think, is that if you're not doing a heart run, then the Busted Crown probably moves up an entire full tier of viability, so to speak. There's a lot of ways to lie, cheat, and steal your way through the first 3 acts. And the extra energy provided by the Busted Crown can definitely help with that. Ectoplasm. I think Ectoplasm's pretty similar to the Busted Crown in that it is a boss relic where the downside is pretty tough to mitigate. You can't get any gold. That means that there's a lot of relics that won't do anything. The Maw Bank, the Ceramic Fish, the Smiling Mask, the Old Coin. These are all relics that are worthless if you pick them up with the Ectoplasm. Notably, the Ectoplasm can't be found at the end of Act 2. You can only get it either as a swap from Niao or at the end of Act 1, and that means it's always going to cost you like 500 to 700 gold. It's a crazy amount of expense. Empty Cage here. 2 removals. Empty Cage used to be a relic that I think I looked at and wondered why it was on why it was grouped in with the other boss relics. Why does this seemingly weak effect come at such a price? But the more that I play Slay the Spire, the more that I've come to value the power of consistency and the power of card removals. And so I think Cage has really come a long way in my evaluations. I don't like it that much as a swap, because I think that it doesn't provide you much of an immediate power spike, and it can be a little difficult to justify going into Act 2, because Act 2 is just really scary on 3 energy in general, but there have been a lot of situations, particularly when I've got a couple good upgraded cards already, and maybe especially if I've gotten a head start on the removals, being able to just trim down the deck further, increase my turn 1 consistency, increase my cycling frequency. It can be a shockingly powerful effect, and something that I would encourage you to open your eyes to the possibility of more and more, especially when it's paired up against energy relics. I did include the starter relic upgrades on here just for completion's sake, so I could talk about all the boss relics at once. We didn't get to play a run with the Frozen Core here. This is the Defect's starter relic upgrade, replacing the Cracked Core. And what the Frozen Core does is give you a Frost Orb on every turn if you don't have all your orb slots full. If you've got any empty orb slots, make a Frost Orb, essentially. I think the Frozen Core can be a really cool thing to build around. I'm going to put it in the B tier, because I think it's a little bit on the low impact side sometimes. But I think overall it's a really cool option for the Defect, and a really unique way to get a run going. Frozen Core pairs well with sources of focus and sources of extra orb slots. Kind of like, the thing I think the Defect can do that's really cool with the Frozen Core is you can have a Frost Orb deck that doesn't actually have any Frost Orb cards in it, and you just have capacitors and defragments and maybe relics that give you orb slots or focus points, but you don't actually need the orb generation cards because the relic will do it for you. Pretty cool. Pairs extremely well with Orichalcum, since you'll get both the Frost Orb and the Orichalcum block. I really do like that combo. It's 5 or even 10 free block right away. And sometimes just simply taking away that Lightning Orb from the Defect's regular start can be quite good. The Fusion Hammer. 1 extra energy, but you cannot upgrade at rest sides. Think of it as the counterpart to the Coffee Dripper. I think it's pretty similarly good to the Coffee Dripper, maybe just a little bit worse than the Dripper. I think B tier is a pretty decent spot for it. There's plenty of ways to work around the downside of the Fusion Hammer, and if you can get any of these ways, you'll have a pretty easy run. Apotheosis to upgrade all your cards, Lesson Learned on Watcher can upgrade things. You can get the Warped Tongues event, letting you upgrade a card every turn, or you can of course get the Upgrade All event in Act 3 from Mind Bloom. But I think it's more frequently the case that the Dripper is a free relic than it is that the Hammer is a free relic. I feel like I should be taking Fusion Hammer more often than I do, though. I could even reasonably see both the Hammer and the Dripper being in the same tier. As a start, though, I think I do prefer the Dripper to the Hammer. Not being able to upgrade at all during your run is a pretty crippling downside, actually. Just being able to get 1 or 2 key cards upgraded can make such a difference in your run. But the additional healing is definitely nice. The Holy Water. This is the starter relic upgrade for the Watcher, and I think it's probably one of the best starting relic upgrades. I'm not sure if I would put this in necessarily A or B tier, but it's somewhere around here. Giving you 3 energy to spend at your discretion in the form of miracles, retaining 0 cost cards. Those miracles can be upgraded by various effects, such as Apotheosis. They can activate relics like the Letter Opener, and they can generate cards from Dead Branch. That makes them pretty good. I like that as a relic quite a bit. And when I've picked up Holy Water on Watcher, I've really liked it. How about Hovering Kite? Hovering Kite is 1 energy the first time each turn that you discard a card, kind of giving you additional incentive to work towards the discard package on the Silent. And I think that the Hovering Kite is hard to make work sometimes, but really solid when it does. As a swap, I think it's actually better than it is as a regular relic. One of the big problems with Hovering Kite is that you get offered it immediately after your rare card, and so frequently your rare card is a major source of discard via something like Unload or especially Tools of the Trade. The Hovering Kite is indeed a no-downside energy relic. Well, no downside as long as you're able to activate its effect each turn. As a Act 2 or 3, depends on the build, right? And I think one of the things that goes really well with the Hovering Kite is a Toxic Egg. And that could be one of the big deciders for like, hey, do I take this? Do I not? How do I feel about it? Inserter. Inserter's a tough one. I think as a start, it's really shaky for the Defect, because the Inserter makes your opening combats so much nastier. You don't have that starting Lightning Orb if you swap your starter relic, and you're also going to be gaining orb slots, making it more difficult to evoke your orbs in the early game. By the time you reach the late game, the extra orb slots of the Inserter are a massive boon, and if you've built around those orbs, then I think this turns into a really exceptional relic, but the immediate downside of it is really tough. I think it's hard. I'm kind of waffling between C and B tier. I actually think this is a C tier start, and then a B tier if you pick it as one of your later relics. Maybe something like C+ or so. I'll let it sit in the C tier there. The C tier looks kind of lonely, so we can move it down by 1. But we'll note that C tier is only as a start, and I think in the later you go, the higher it gets on the list here. I do think the Inserter is a really good relic, and something that you should definitely be considering to build around in your late game. It goes very well with Consume. Black Blood here. Black Blood is the starter upgrade for the Ironclad. Again, you can't get these starting relic upgrades as swaps, but I did feel the need to include them here for completion's sake, so to speak. Black Blood is an interesting relic. I think of all the boss relics, I feel the most differently about Black Blood, whether you're doing a heart run or a not heart run. If you're not going for the heart, then I think Black Blood can be a very, very effective source of sustain. Making sure that you reach your act bosses with full or nearly full HP, so that you can tackle them kind of using your face. But that doesn't work that well in Act 4. So I would say that for non-heart runs, this is probably a B relic, but otherwise it's a C. Still a useful way to get through Act 2 and Act 3, but I don't think it's something that you're really ideally wanting to take a lot of the time. Another Ironclad exclusive, the Mark of Pain. This is Ironclad's energy relic, adding 2 wounds to the draw pile each combat. It's a little bit difficult to mitigate the downside of this one. You can kind of think of it as adding 2 curses to the deck, but unlike the curse key, you're not allowed to remove those wounds. While it's true that you can't draw them on turn 1, it can be very difficult to counteract these with Exhaust or with Evolve. and you'll almost always inevitably have to draw the wounds at least one time. For that reason, I think I probably want to put this in one of the lower tiers. I don't think it's bad enough to be down there with Busted Crown, but C is pretty reasonable, I think. I think it's definitely one of the more challenging relics, and definitely one of the ones I really struggle with. I'm not sure that I would rate the Mark of Pain that much differently for Swap versus Act 1 versus Act 2. Kind of feels pretty similar. How about Nuclear Battery? Nuclear Battery is an interesting one. It replaces your Lightning Orb with a Plasma Orb. Well, if you swap your starting relic, otherwise you're just adding a Plasma Orb behind the Lightning Orb, which can be its own kind of advantage. And that gives the Defect immediately 1 energy per turn, plus 2 when evoked. It gets around a lot of the disadvantage that many of the other Defect starter relics have, which is that your dual cast doesn't do anything immediately. Although we did note when we played these that in your first 3 combats of the Nuclear Battery run, it is an active disadvantage against, say, Jawworm, by preventing you from dual casting the Lightning Orb. That said, I do think it's one of the better swaps, and a pretty cool relic overall. Fascinatingly enough, it's better the fewer orbs you have, and I think that's what makes it such a good swap, specifically, is that you can plan around keeping or really utilizing that Plasma Orb from the very get-go, whereas if you're adding it to an existing deck, it can be a little bit more difficult to utilize. I feel like as a swap, then it's A tier, and then as a non-swap, probably closer to B tier. Pandora's Box. An oldie but a goodie. The good old pbox transforms every strike and defend in the deck. At the start of the run, there's no question for me that this is the absolute strongest possible swap to get. You get 8 or 9 or 10 transforms depending on your character, and almost always this is a good thing. There are, of course, some exceptions to the rule, and a pbox start can be a very harrowing experience if you get absolutely no block cards or very, very low damage. But I would say that a good 99.9% of the time, Pandora's Box is a massive improvement over the starting deck. In later acts, when you already have maybe a couple of removals, maybe you already have one of your starting cards upgraded, then it gets a little bit worse. And I would argue that actually starting with the pbox is probably S+ tier, and then normally pbox is somewhere in the S tier range. It is a crazy, crazy, crazy good relic that can lead to some truly unique runs. It is, however, a little challenging. A pbox start is going to put you in some very unusual deck building situations, and if you don't have a really good grasp of how to evaluate a deck of cards, you may not know what to do with what the heck you just got when you're starting with the pbox, and that can definitely be a confusing and difficult part. But ultimately, I think the 10 random cards start is just fantastic. Fantastic. How do I feel about Philosopher's Stone? Philosopher's Stone it's pretty easy energy. What Philo Stone does is give you energy and then makes enemies do a little bit more damage. The more times that enemy attacks, the more damage they do, which makes it scary against Heart. But for the most part, Philo Stone's penalty takes the form of you take between 1 to 3 damage per turn, essentially. Kind of a nice, even, low-impact penalty that I think solidly puts the Philo Stone in the B tier. There's almost no way to avoid this penalty. You can use cards like Disarm or Malaise to get rid of the extra strength, but you'll never be completely free of it. So a lot of times you are better off with a different relic, but a lot of times you're also worse off with a different relic. Hey everyone, did you know that you can now support me directly on YouTube by getting a channel membership? For as low as $5 a month, you'll get access to perks like custom badges and emojis to use in comments and discounts on the merch store, all while helping support me and this channel to do what I love every day. Just click the join button below to get started. Now back to the video. Trying to kind of both talk about these in the context of swaps and generally speaking. Some of the relics are fairly different for one versus the others. And not all of these you can get from swapping. For example, the last of the starter relic upgrades, the Ring of the Serpent, gives you 1 extra card every single turn, but takes away that starting relic of the Ring of the Snake, so takes away your 2 bonus cards on turn 1. And it's that particular feature that really gives me a hard time with the Ring of the Serpent. I think as an overall effect, 1 card draw per turn is an exceptionally good Boss Relic kind of effect. Monster Train gives you the option to take +1 draw as your Boss Relic, and I think that's an excellent option there. But the fact that you're losing -2 draw on the first turn in order to get it means that you're not actually getting any additional cards from this relic until turn 3. Which makes it a pretty tough sell. It's still a really, really useful relic for longer combats. If your turn is going 5, 6, 7 or more turns, as the Heart Fight often goes, then it's got a lot of use there. But boy, does it give you a hard time in the shorter fights. Runic Cube. Cube's an interesting one. Cube is a very interesting one. 1 draw every time that you take damage. Giving up the Black Blood to get a Runic Cube is pretty tough. You won't be taking damage a whole lot of times in Act 1. And I do think, as a result, Cube is maybe one of the worst swaps to get. But the later you get into the run, especially towards the heart, the better Cube becomes, as you're able to more reliably build around self-damage, and potentially draw lots and lots and lots of cards from the Runic Cube. That makes it pretty difficult for me to evaluate this thing. I'd say probably as a swap, this is C tier, but then A or B tier, depending on the circumstance. And I think that is ultimately a fairly valid reason to put something in a lower tier, is this is a fairly conditional relic. It's absolutely possible for Runic Cube to be the single most powerful relic for a given run. If you've got a copy of Pain in your deck, for example, Runic Cube can be so very much card draw. Draw a card whenever you play a card. And we just recently had something like that, where we were able to use the Runic Cube to almost infinitely draw cards for ourselves. C is for circumstantial, that's right. And the problem then with the swap becomes your Act 1, is that, you have more trouble against your early elites or your early combats, because your relic isn't doing as much as, say, the starter relic would, but then maybe B tier for the later stuff. Let's leave it on C tier here for as a swap. Even though we did win our cube swap on the first try, maybe I should do some more cube swap runs. Sacred Bark, double strength potions. A relic I often want to have, but rarely do I feel like I have the space, so to speak, to take it. Rarely do I feel like it's a better choice than the other options. The core trickiness with Sacred Bark is, of course, by empowering your single-use resource of potions. It's a boss relic that gives you a very powerful effect in some fights, and then absolutely nothing in other fights. And that really makes it tricky. I do think it's quite good to get at the start of the run. Probably as a start, I'd put this as B or maybe even A tier as a starting relic, because it's going to affect the most potions if you get it at the start of the game. And I think it's a really good answer to your Act 1 elites and Act 1 bosses. Just 1 strength or dexterity potion that's multiplied by 2 becomes an overwhelming force in the face of the early game. And there's so many other, even normally weak potions, like the Essence of Steel, 4 plated armor, double that to 8 plated armor, almost completely stops the 3 Sentries fight. Almost completely stops damage from Gremlin Knob or Lagavulin. And of course, combos with many other relics, like the White Beast statue or the Alchemize card. I think it gets a little bit worse in the later game, maybe B or C tier, if you're picking it up later. But it could also be something that you pick up just because you have a really good potion. Maybe you've got in your potion belt an ancient potion and a flex potion together that you want to use on heart. And if you pick up a Sacred Bark, well, that gets twice as good. So where do we leave this then? A, B, or C? I would say A as swap, B or C as the others. Well, let's leave it on A then, as a swap. I think I like it quite a bit. How about Sozu? Sozu's the opposite, right? No potions, but you gain energy every single turn. As a starting relic, I think Sozu is D tier. Not having any potions for the entire run is a really crippling downside that is really hard to get around. If you're picking up Sozu in Act 2 or going into Act 2 or going into Act 3 and you already have good potions in your potion belt though, then Sozu can be a much better thing. And I think in general I would probably put Sozu in the C tier, around the same rank as Ectoplasm and some of the other difficult to take energy relics. And if you've got, say, like a potion belt with 4 potions in it, it might even be B or A tier. But if we're talking about start of the run when you can't have potions, you will always have 0 potions, and you will always keep 0 potions. If you start with it, well, that's D tier for sure. Meat says, Sozu is nice as a banner because it's a mechanic that you don't need to think about often. That I do agree with, big time. Is that, starting out in this game, I definitely rated Sozu a lot higher, and I think when you're starting out, Sozu is a lot more valuable, because when you have less game knowledge, less game experience, your potions are less useful to you. You're less likely to remember to use them in the best circumstance, and you'll have a harder time knowing when the right moment is. How about the Dome? Dome prevents you from seeing enemy intents, but gives you additional energy every single turn in exchange. Dome's a weird one. In many combats, there's quite a few deterministic combats in Slay the Spire, where the enemy follows the exact same attack pattern no matter what. In those fights, the Dome is simply a game knowledge check. Can you remember or look up what this enemy can do? But in other fights, notably, the Time Eater is probably my least favorite enemy to face with the Runic Dome. The Time Eater is the deadly mix of random attacks, so you don't know what the Time Eater is going to do on their turn, and they have the clock mechanic, where they'll gain strength for every 12 cards you play. So it's a mixture of not letting you know what the Time Eater is going to do, plus punishing you if you play the wrong cards. That makes the Dome really, really tough in that fight. That said, I think overall the Dome is a very good energy relic, and probably goes up here with some of the good ones. As a start, I think it's actually probably A tier, because so many of the fights in Act 1 are deterministic and can be predicted entirely. And then as you get into the later game, closer to B or C. And you're completely understandable if you have a personal distaste for the Runic Dome. Many people do, struggling with not being able to see the enemy intents or being frustrated by the practice of looking up or remembering their capabilities outside of the game. And that's completely reasonable. I personally avoid the Runic Dome a lot of the time, just because I think it makes for a worse stream viewing experience. But as a start, as an experienced player, I think it's an A tier energy relic, truthfully. It's pretty good. Especially if you're able to either play your whole hand every turn, which is useful in most combats, although not against Time Eater, or if you're able to retain your block somehow. Calipers and, of course, Barricade can make that pretty good. Writhing Mass also, of course, a fight that's exceedingly difficult with the Dome, right? You don't know if you're going to get cursed or not, so that can make it pretty tough, too. How about Tiny House? Tiny House gives the old bunch of stuff, I call it. 5 max HP, 50 gold, 1 potion, 1 random upgrade, and 1 card reward. As a starting bonus, I actually quite like it. I think it's maybe a B tier start, or even slightly above average. It's a lot of different little things that are all very helpful at the start of the run. However, as you get later into the run, I think it falls pretty short compared to most of the other boss relics that you can be offered. The best thing you can really say about Tiny House is that it always gives you something that's useful, whether that be just a few hit points or the 50 gold, and you shouldn't disregard 50 gold, by the way. It's not a whole lot of money, but money is incredibly valuable in Slay the Spire. So I think as a non-start, it's probably D tier. I almost never take the Tiny House, which is a real shame, because I do think it's a really fun and very cool relic. It's not quite enough. It's not quite enough. But we'll let it, as a swap here, we'll let it give it a home in the C to represent that it's too good for D tier. It's too good. Times when you may want to take Tiny House deliberately are moments where your other choices are either useless to you or actively harmful to you. For example, energy relics that have a downside that you can't bear. For example, a coffee dripper in a run that really needs some healing, or a velvet choker in a run that's very dependent on playing lots of cards to survive. Speaking of, how about the velvet choker? How about the velvet choker? Velvet choker limits you to 6 cards per turn. I think this can be one of the biggest relics to either build around or not. The Velvet Choker rewards you for having really efficient, compact cards. These are cards that either just do a lot in and of themselves, the 2 energy blocks, the damage over time cards, or cards that scale based on something else that's happened, either scaling with number of cards in hand, like Second Wind or Fiendfire, or that are able to power up over the course of a combat, something like Blizzard or Thunderstrike, cards that'll, you can play one card and have a lot happen, essentially. Choker plus Pocket Watch, one of my favorite combos. The Pocket Watch, of course, giving you more card draw if you play fewer cards, so naturally those pair pretty well together. I think as a start, the Choker's pretty tough. I found it relatively difficult to consistently assemble decks that were able to utilize the Choker. Don't know if I like it more or less when I'm not starting with it. It's interesting. This is very much one of the relics where I think I'd like to really give it a rating per class, because I think it has it's S or A tier on Ironclad, and it's much worse on Silent and Watcher, and then kind of okay on Defect. So it's really hard to just give it one singular rating here for everything. But given how much difficulty we had in the challenge, it feels pretty hard to justifiably put it in A tier here. So I think I'll slap it in B. Yeah, we need 12 tier lists. Act 1, 2, and 3 for Ironclad, Silent, and Defect. But that is kind of quintessentially to Slay the Spire, right? It's all about taking your kind of baseline understanding of all of the different mechanics and effects, and then the game of Slay the Spire really is, how do you evaluate each of these things in the specific contexts that you encounter them in your given run. And at any given moment in a regular run of Slay the Spire, your context may be highly unusual, or very strongly leaning towards one thing more than the mean, so to speak. Lotus. Additional energy when the Watcher leaves calm. Lotus is a very strong boost to what is already one of Watcher's strongest mechanics, the Stance Dance. Giving you further incentive to pick up specifically calm entry cards like Inner Peace, like Meditate, like Fear No Evil. And I think it's a very, very good relic overall. It can be... The only really tricky thing, I think, with a Lotus is, are you offered cards that say calm on them, really? If you do, then it's going to be fantastic. Sometimes you don't want it just because you've reached Act 2 or 3, and you haven't seen any of those, but if you're getting into the start of the run, it's pretty dang fantastic, and I think overall the Lotus is really good. It's just it's an energy-generating relic that has no downside, and those are always pretty good. Of course, allows for some crazy combos, too. Notably, Violet Lotus plus Upgraded Eruption plus Vigilance plus Rushdown equals an infinite combo if the deck is small enough, and that's only 1 card plus 1 Boss Relic away from the starting deck, which is a frighteningly easy win condition. It's not fair to rate it differently than Kite. Well, it's not fair for Watcher to do what she does compared to Silent, I guess. But what about the Wristblade? What about the Wristblade? Wristblade making 0-cost attacks do 4 additional damage. There's quite a few 0-cost attacks in the Silent pool. I think as a general boss relic, it's a reasonable one. I don't often find myself taking it just because I've got a more developed deck at the time. But right at the start of the run, I think this is actually a really good relic, maybe if not even one of the best. I think we could reasonably even actually put this in S tier as a swap. As a regular Boss Relic, probably towards A or even B. There's often a lot of better options, but the runs where I have started with wristblade have been absolutely insane. Blade Dance right at the start of the run, if you have a wristblade, does 24 damage for 1 energy and upgrades to 32 damage for 1 energy. Of course, Slice is good. You get the immediate boost with Neutralize, which helps make the swap consistently good, because it means you're immediately getting a big boost in your opening combats, and it just gets better from there. There's lots of colorless cards that it works with, including Dramatic Entrance, Swift Strike, and Flash of Steel. And the best part of all is that the wristblade will boost any card that is temporarily 0 cost. For example, any card you generate from an attack potion, or anything that is made free by bullet time. Wristblade swap on all characters? I'm in. Give me a better reason to take Anger in Act 1. I want it. Alright, only 4 to go. Certainly not least, but close to last here. The Snecko Eye starts with an S, goes an S. Do I need to explain myself further? Okay, I guess I will. Snecko Eye, it's incredible. You get 2 additional cards each turn, and your cards are random cost. The random cost can be a detriment, even, actually, especially at the beginning of the run. And sometimes, if you take a Snecko Eye, you're inevitably going to see 1 or 2 hands where you get to choose 1 out of 7 cards, and you get to play it. And those are sad turns. But you still get to choose one of those 7 cards. And a normal hand of Slay the Spire only has 5 cards in it. That's less choices than 7. Which, that kind of sounds like a meme the way I'm saying it, but I'm truly meaning that as a good thing. 7 choices is more than 5 choices. 7 cards in hand is more than 5 cards in hand. That's, at its core, why the Snecko Eye is really good. Is because it enables you to draw more cards, have more options, and then the cost randomization becomes this kind of like game that you're playing with the Snecko Eye to fight for an advantage. Filling the deck with big expensive cards, which is more easy to do the earlier you find the Snecko Eye. One important thing to note is that because of the random costs of Snecko Eye, and just because of the card design of Spire in general with high cost cards, having 1 or 2 really powerful expensive cards in a Snecko deck can outweigh a dozen 0 cost cards. You know, if you have a bunch of claws and 1 meteor strike, it's still going to be a really good Snecko Eye, for example. I think of the characters, the Ironclad probably benefits the most from Snecko. He's got an exceedingly high average card cost. But Defect and Watcher are not far behind there. And I think maybe the Silent benefits the least, with the lowest average card cost in general, but everybody loves the Snecko Eye, and I think everybody particularly loves starting with the Snecko Eye, giving you the most time to build around it. Runic Pyramid here, also one of my favorites. The Runic Pyramid lets you retain your cards from turn to turn, instead of discarding them. And the Pyramid, therefore, is the king of what I call consistency, enabling you to always have your blocks in hand on the turn you need them, ensuring that you can maximize the damage you deal when your enemy gives you a free turn, ensuring that your cards that combo with each other never fail. I love the Runic Pyramid. It's my favorite relic in Slay the Spire, and I think it's an exceptionally powerful boss relic, too. It's good as soon as you get it. A Runic Pyramid start is going to take a lot less damage on average to the opening combats than most other starts. And a Runic Pyramid is, of course, going to be something that you can really build around to get some seriously powerful combinations going. I think it's a fantastic relic overall. There are some reasons not to want the Pyramid. The biggest problem is what we call hand clog, where you've got a hand full of cards that you're retaining with the Pyramid, but you're unable to play more than a couple of them, and so you're unable to draw new cards. That can especially be a problem if you also have the Snecko Eye. I don't think it's ever really a good idea to get both of these relics at the same time, barring a few exceptions. But if your cards are kind of expensive and you have relatively little energy, or if you have a surplus of card draw in your deck, then you may not want the Runic Pyramid. That's another good situation where it's something to avoid, is a card draw surplus. If you're already drawing 7 or 8 cards per turn, Pocket Watch can be a good way to get to this state. Then you're no longer able to really benefit from the pyramid. Calling Bell. I really like Calling Bell as a relic design-wise. You get 1 unremovable curse, the Curse of the Bell, which can be blocked by Omamori. And then 3 immediate relics, 1 common, 1 uncommon, and 1 rare. Relics now are better than relics later, and I think as a swap, it really depends on what you get. I think I'm going to put it in the B tier, but I'd say this is probably between B and A. The curse downside can be a little stinky immediately, but it's really up to the 3 random relics you get, how good the Calling Bell is. I've had Calling Bell starts that were exceptionally easy, because 3 good relics at the start of the run can be very much a powerful snowball effect. But I've also had Calling Bell starts where none of the 3 relics really did much at the start of the run, and then you're playing at a disadvantage because you have a curse. And that's true both as a start and later in the run. The Calling Bell, it's a bit of a gamble, but boy can that gamble pay off big time. Blood Vial, Meat on the Bone, Duvodol, and Ironclad. We had recently a run where we started with Guria on Silent. Or, no, wait. It was Molten Egg and Guria on Defect, right? Is that what I'm remembering? Our Calling Bell from this recent challenge was an exceptionally lucky one, and we got not only really good relics at the start, but we got relics that worked well together. Bonus strength and upgraded attacks. And those worked really well. I think Calling Bell did poorly as a ladder challenge, partially because it's inconsistent, right? Like, if you're trying to do 20 runs in a row, starting with the Calling Bell, then inevitably you're going to get 1 or 2 where you don't get much of use at the start. I think that's an excellent point, Erasmus. Calling Bell is the only way to start your run with an uncommon relic, so it's the only way to start your run with one of the egg relics that upgrade all cards of the appropriate type, and that's pretty cool. Lastly, the Slaver's Collar. Slaver's Collar gives you extra energy during boss and elite fights, but not during regular combats. I really, really like the Slaver's Collar on lower Ascension levels, prior to Ascension 20, when you can get away with just front-loading your way through fights like the Shelled Parasite and the Chosen. But when you hit Ascension 17 and enemies get extra power, I don't quite like it as much, because a lot of the time when I take the Slaver's Collar, I find myself really struggling through the first fights of Act 2 or Act 3. Particularly struggling against Darklings when I'm unable to deal with all their multi-attacks, particularly struggling against Shelled Parasite, struggling against the 2 Thieves at the start of Act 2. I particularly like Slaver's Collar as your 5th point of energy for the deck. So say you've already got one of the other boss relics that provide energy, the Dome, the Key, the Ecto, whatever it is. Adding Slaver's Collar to that, to me, feels really good, because you already have enough energy to get through your regular fights, and then for the extra difficult fights, the bosses and elites, you get to spend a little bit more. So, those are the different boss relics of Slay the Spire and my ratings for them. Rating them as a start for the ones that are appropriate, and kind of an average rating for the starter relic upgrades. If you like this video, let me know in the comments below, what's your favorite boss relic to use in Slay the Spire? And don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel for more content. Thanks so much for watching, everybody. Hope you enjoyed. Hey everyone. Thanks so much for watching. Did you know that I'm live 5 days a week on Twitch? Come join us to watch me live, ask questions, or chill with the community. Click the link in the description below to follow and be notified when I'm live. And while you're down there, make like a sandwich and sub to this channel for more fresh Baylor content. Ta-ta for now.